This idea that we can't do that here, that really kills me.
Traditionally, brand building has always been an inward affair. The guidelines are fixed. Those are kind of getting unshackled.
Brands inevitably have to change. Companies no longer own the brand, the consumers own the brand. The agencies who have worked on the most iconic brands in the world, they almost never have an equity stake. So you're getting a percentage of a percentage.
As an agency owner, to make the transition into education business that you did, talk us through how that transition happened.
I would rather fail pursuing the impossible than to succeed pursuing the possible. If I was an agency today in 2024, I don't want to work for a company. I want to be the brand myself.
Hey everyone, so for the first time, it's 10:30 here at Dubai time. We're doing this in a very different way, the NoBSness Podcast. We've got someone who's extremely special from Los Angeles. Chris is essentially one of the leading thinkers when it comes to design and the business of design and the business of creative output. He is someone whom I have always looked up to. I remember the video that I saw 7 years ago when it comes to pricing creative output, and I'm quite excited to do this in a manner where he's connecting with me here from Los Angeles while I'm here in Dubai. So look forward to the chat. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks very much. I'm looking forward to having this dialogue.
How's it going, Chris? Last time, I think a few days ago, you were in Sharjah, and then I think you've been traveling around different latitudes and longitudes. How's it going in the past, let's say the last 12 months of your work, and what are the new things that you're looking forward to?
Thanks for asking that question. I go in seasons of speaking where there will be months or weeks that'll go by, and I'm mostly focused on working content, coaching and helping people developing products. But towards the end of the year, things get really busy with different events and organizations going on. So I've been globetrotting a little bit. Came back from Sharjah, as you mentioned, and then I was in Glendale doing a talk. And then I have a week and a half before I go to, Las Vegas, and then Miami, Ireland, and then London, and then back home again. And then I'll take a break for about 2 months and spend time with family.
Yeah. Nice. And through all of these different places that you're sort of speaking at and sort of interacting with people, what do you see as those key themes that you kind of hear again and again? And it happens all the time, right? There's this pattern of things that keep coming up across and everywhere, which essentially are directly in correlation to what we guys do, which is the business of agencies, the business of creative studios.
Some of the themes that I'm hearing, of course, as always, with a questionable market, high interest rates, inflation, wars on multiple fronts in different countries. There's a lot of instability in the world, horrific things happening, and then also an election year. So things are like up in the air. And when there's so much uncertainty, people don't spend money. Things get really tight because they're not quite sure what to prepare for. And I think creative service professionals feel this as budgets get cut or projects get delayed. So their question almost always is, how do I generate more leads, and how do I work with better, more qualified clients? The next question they're asking is, how is AI going to impact the things that we do as creative humans? Is it going to replace the marketing agencies, branding agencies, and the design work that we do? It's definitely having an impact already. So there's questions about AI. Then the last thing is, people want to know, I'm in a place of thought leadership. How do I build my personal brand? How can I increase my reach, engagement? How do I build a cult-like following for the kinds of things that I want to say and share? They tend to be those three categories that I work within. What about you? What are you hearing? What are you seeing?
I think the second part that you mentioned, which is AI, I think it's a no-brainer. Everyone's talking about it in terms of how do we kind of incorporate it, be it from the client side or be it from the agency side. You hear a lot about it, but I think the business of AI is yet to be cracked from an agency point of view. There's a lot of work happening in that direction, but how does it sort of enhance the quality of work? I think that's still something which we are yet to see. The second important aspect is this comparison between agencies in different parts of the world, especially from a Middle East perspective. I've been doing this for close to 10 years now, growing an agency, growing different specialization in it. I think for the first time, I see a realistic path to how agencies from the Middle East can actually make an impact in different parts of the world. And I see this through recognition of work. I see this through people who are being recognized in different parts of the world. So that's something which I do find very interesting. And I think the third thing is how agencies who are focused on subculture or specialization are kind of coming into mainstream. Let's say something like a gaming today is a mainstream conversation that you're having. Gaming agencies are now getting briefs to do work when it comes to production, or one work when it comes to creative output. So I think that's very interesting. So I probably call these three things. Is that
Yeah.
something that you see as well, the last one?
Let's just focus on gaming for a second because there's a lot there to unpack, right? When we think about gaming, the graphics cards that are necessary to drive the kinds of realistic real-time rendering and the software that's needed to be able to represent some image that almost feels lifelike is pushing development and innovation. And we can see it rippling across multiple industries. One example is the Unreal Engine or Unity, or some of these engines that are being created are being used in visual effects applications, which they weren't used before because the quality has crossed the tipping point. And ILM, Industrial Light and Magic in the Bay Area, they've utilized real-time gaming engine to develop the volume where they're shooting episodes like The Mandalorian. This is a game changer. And the manufacturers of those cards, their stock has skyrocketed. And what's interesting here is that it used to be that you could afford like a gaming card with a strong processor, but because of NFTs, crypto mining, and now AI, the manufacturers of these video cards or these rendering cards are just one of the most valuable companies in the world. So we can see the rippling effect. And then we can also see agencies who service gaming industries have a certain kind of fresh approach to how they think about selling and hyping up products, that they're starting to take away business from traditional agencies as well. So whenever we see something happens, it doesn't happen in isolation. It's kind of like that idea of the butterfly effect, where a butterfly flaps its wing in Brazil and then a hurricane happens in America. Everything's interconnected, and we realize how small the world is.
True, absolutely. I think staying on the gaming aspect of things, what we're seeing in the Middle East is phenomenal, purely from a lot of investment which is happening in this space. Of course, gaming in itself is not a single animal. There's esports and there's game
Right.
streamers and game development. So, but specifically on how esports is being promoted in the region, it's kind of interesting to see what's going to happen, because traditionally esports as a model has never been a profitable model. It's essentially been used by game asset companies to build a community, and that was the main objective of it. Now for the first time, you're seeing investments going into esports to build profitable assets out of it, and I think that's going to further sort of drive conversations. A lot of international brands are investing in teams situated in the Middle East, which is quite interesting. But kind of coming back to talking about building brand identity or building brand communications, how's that changed in the recent years from your perspective, Chris? Because traditionally, brand building has always been an inward affair, right? There's always been someone who sort of thinks of the brand as something that is their own sacrosanct. The guidelines are fixed, things have to happen in a certain way. Those are kind of getting unshackled now. A lot of brands are kind of now getting co-created along with their consumers. Umpteen examples of how brands are sort of are open to having fun with their audiences. Does it change the business? Does it change how we look at brands? And is there any opportunities or spaces for agencies to come in?
I think brands inevitably have to change and have to evolve with the advent of social media, because the channels of communication, distribution of messaging and communication have drastically changed. Instead of one or a few channels controlling the conversation, now you and I have the conversation about a product, a hotel, a meal that we ate, an airline that we flew in, or something like that. And so Marty Neubauer writes about this in his book, The Brand Flip. He said, companies no longer own the brand, the consumers own the brand, because a brand is
Correct.
what people's collective feeling about it is, right? And so a lot of brands have been caught flat-footed, haven't adapted to this, still use traditional models of creativity, strategy, and distribution. And I think they're being left out. They're kind of surprised when a relatively unknown person can start a beverage company that has hundreds of millions of dollars in sales within a very short period of time, and they're threatened by this. And it's because those people, they weren't brought up in the old world with the old rules. They don't know what the rules are even. And so they just break them all. And then they start to connect with people. And a lot of what we buy is a reflection of our identity, how we see ourselves, our aspirations, how we define who we are, what makes us us. A lot of it is tied into status. Like, I buy this because of these reasons. Who am I if I buy these things? And I think if companies or brands continue to stay in the old model, they're going to be left behind. And we kind of see the emergence of a few things. And then before you know it, it'll be past that tipping point. And the ones who understand how to have conversations with customers and are more responsive and are co-creating will probably dominate the markets.
If it had to be a young marketer in today's time, Chris, and they're looking to sort of, let's say, start a D2C brand, what are those things that they would have to do which are different, and what are the things they would not have to do which are the same old sort of conventional way of doing things? If Chris had to do it, how would he do it?
Well, let's talk about it. Okay, so if I run an agency and I'm trying to help brands build, so I want to just deconstruct the question, because if I was an agency today in 2024, I don't want to work for a company. I want to be the brand myself. And so for me to give my creative energies to companies, I would want some kind of equity in it. I would want to build a true partnership, a small percentage, but something where we both have skin in the game and we're both thinking strategically, not just in terms of the execution component of it, but the market share, the growth, innovation. I want to be able to influence and drive some of those things, and to work with someone who's not just looking at me as a vendor to complete tasks. And I think that's the fundamental problem. I've always wondered this. The agencies who have worked on the most iconic brands in the world, they get paid really well, relatively speaking, for creative fees, but it's almost always billed hourly. They almost never have an equity stake. And if the agency is helping, then they're making a small percentage. If we kind of look at across the board, and let's just assume there's a number here, most companies will spend between 5 to 15 or 20% on marketing. And in that marketing, there's a lot of money there for creative, but more money in media buying. So you're getting a percentage of a percentage, and you're only as good as your last campaign. Because at any point in time, your client, the brand, can just say, we're done with you. After 10 years of building you into a multi-billion or trillion-dollar brand, they're just done with you because they're tired. That doesn't feel right for me. So I would change that relationship, and I would encourage new startups or companies who really want to effectively tap into markets and into the creativity of the team that you're working with. You need to structure a deal where everybody has skin in the game. I'll give you a dumb example here. Zuckerberg, when he was just starting out, when he didn't have a lot of money, hired an artist to paint a mural in his office because he loved the person's art, right? And he's like, I can pay you something, or I can give you stock in the company. That person wisely chose stock in the company, and then everything else is history.
Absolutely.
But you see, they're sharing something in exchange for a future. Do we believe in the same future together? And it makes a lot of sense. It's very equitable for everybody.
True. Also, it kind of comes down to how do you equate the brand with the business, right? I mean, that it in itself is sort of developing tangible contribution of the brand and what's the value that it draws. I mean, for a blue chip company or someone who's probably already publicly listed, that's probably something which is already made tangible. But for all kinds of different businesses, the whole idea of what's the valuation of my brand is something that is not as accepted or understood even
Right.
today for a lot of businesses. And I think that's where the correlation is, because if you're adding value to the brand, how much does the brand essentially contribute to the business?
Yeah.
Though it does contribute a lot, but then there are different views in different departments. A CFO
Right.
would think very differently than a CMO. I think that's where the real sort of dichotomy is.
I put some thought into this. Now, let's say you're the chief brand officer, chief marketing officer, and CEO, the three kind of really important, chief revenue officer, the four of you are sitting in a boardroom and saying, look, we have $1 million company or $2 million or $10 million company, and we want to grow it. What should we spend on the services of a branding agency, like a true branding agency? And they look at it as like an expense because the results seem very soft and intangible, but I have a whole different way of looking at this, okay? The first thing that you want to say is, like, let's say you make a container to hold water, okay? And now, whatever you can buy this for at its raw cost is what we would consider a commodity. And there's lots of brands and companies. Some have strong brands, some don't. What you can charge as a premium determines the value of your brand. So if I were to put a Nike swoosh on here or an Apple logo on here, inherently, the exact same object has more value. And the more value it generates by having an impression or a logo or something on it says to you that's the value of your brand. So this is very measurable. It is very tangible. And all you have to say is, what kind of premium can I charge over a comparable replacement? And that's so, like, if we buy a tire and we say the tire is $99 and we buy a BF Goodrich tire, and that is now, or a Pirelli tire or whatever the brand is, and that's a $400 tire. Why do we pay 3 or 4 times more than something that works? Well, because there's a reputation, there's a belief in the innovation of technology. Maybe they've sold you on the concept of safety, or maybe there's something else, or they attach themselves to Formula One racers, world championship drivers who swear, for my car, for my life, this is the tire. So there's association. And even if they're totally identical products, somebody would pay 3 or 4 times more because they want that feeling of comfort and status and identity. And those are very important things for them to pay for. So when you're working with a very skilled marketer and branding agency who understands the larger context of what we're talking about,
Yeah.
then what they do is they try to build this irrational emotional connection between the product or the service with the consumer. They need to understand the consumer's aspirational goals, who they see themselves as, who they aspire to become, and they help them fulfill that.
That's a very interesting point about the premium that a brand brings in. And sometimes to actually build that premium, you have agencies who are basically working with a very small set of clients,
Yes.
but essentially are almost in-house teams for these clients. And that's their model of growth. And then there are agencies who the services are almost productized and standardized to the extent that they can then scale up with a large amount of clients. And I think these are two different approaches, isn't it? For the second one, it's sort of tougher to take that approach when it comes to equity because you're working with so many different clients, your services are limited, your teams also are kind of limited in terms of how much you're associating yourself with a certain client.
I don't know if I would associate size of agency to the quality of the work or the impact they can create. For example, if you're working with a brilliant mind, a marketer, copywriter, strategist, and brand builder, they can advise you to do certain things that are going to make your company grow 100 times.
Right.
Versus working with a really large agency where they have dozens of teams that have done top shelf work, but you're just one of many. That doesn't mean that they're going to do great work for you. And a lot of times people mistakenly take indicators of the past being a good, strong, or evidence of the past result as a strong indicator of the future. There's too many variables. We live in a different time, quite literally, and you are a different company, you're a different person, and you make a different product and service. And so it's kind of delusional. I think small companies can do great big things and big companies can do great big things, but it's really dependent on who's behind it and what their business model and the creatives they have behind it.
And I think that's where there is this sort of anomaly when it comes to goodwill of an agency, right? Like the goodwill of an agency on one side keeps growing because of the work that you're doing, and your team grows, scale grows, and then you start charging or your prices increase because of that goodwill, but it's not necessary that that actually equates to good work over a period of time. I keep saying this to people, it's one of those few industries where the growth of the agency and making things more standard, sort of a cookie cutter approach to agency services, actually gets you more money when it shouldn't. And if you look at an industry like, let's say, if you're probably a McDonald's, you probably charge much lesser because you're able to standardize, you're able to sort of build things with standardized labor and sort of things which are more independent of craftsmanship. Agency is like completely opposite in that sense, right? As you rightly said, I completely agree with you. The scale of the agency is not in correlation to the goodwill of what it's built. Do you see that anomaly in pricing in terms of how agencies price themselves?
I don't know that much about how agencies price. Generally speaking, the way I see it is large agencies tend to have heavier price tags because you're paying for not just the creative work, you're paying for the overhead, the opportunity cost, the downtime, all that kind of stuff. And there's an association, like we're working in a big building. There's 500 people in that agency. And of course, it's going to cost more. If we say we take it, compare it to a small legal practice when there's 2 attorneys versus a giant corporation of attorneys, when they have 500 attorneys, their billable hour is going to be, I think, generally higher. You're going to expect to pay more because we associate size with higher value, and therefore we're willing to pay a higher price.
Do you see a lot of shops, which are independent shops, gaining prominence as it comes? Is the industry going to be sort of more consolidated into these networks which happen, or is it going to be sort of more fragmented?
So there are a couple of large holding companies when it comes to media and creative, right? So what they do is, I don't think they know how to innovate anymore. And so what they do is they use their money for different things instead of innovation. What they do is they just buy other agencies that are on the come up. And so you have a window when you're an independent agency and you do your thing. And the lure of being a part of a larger network and the money and the security is a pretty strong and compelling reason to then sell your company, and you're bought into the network. Correct. So I think it's one of these things where they consume. And at some point it becomes untenable. And then they go through a drop in revenue and profit margins and earnings calls. So then they just chop a whole bunch of people. And those people wind up going back in the field. They're reseated. They start new agencies again, and the process begins over and over again. I find a strange parallel with The Matrix, one of my favorite films of all time. The Wachowskis write The Matrix, and we keep thinking there's an answer, there's an end to this. But by the time you get to the 3rd episode in the trilogy, the whole reveals, it just gets rebooted. And it's kind of heartbreaking to say like this continues again and again for all of eternity. But maybe that's really how some organisms work. It just needs to be rebooted and it starts over again.
I think a lot of independent agency owners, at least the ones who kind of are in the business of the agency, look at exits as sort of a very pliable route in terms of how their eventual route is going to look like. Is there any alternate routes at this point of time, Chris, that you've seen, which probably success stories which are not necessarily about exiting?
I think so. And I mentioned it before. I think so. Because if you're in the business of building products and culture and messaging and community and communications for companies that really didn't register on the radar, I've always wondered this. Why don't you just build one yourself? Have a concept for a burger stand that makes really kind of well-crafted burgers with a clever idea behind it. Why wouldn't you do that? Maybe because they don't have the operational capacity to do that, but then you can also hire and outsource that. So my thinking is, whether you're a 2-person agency or a 2,000-person agency, why not take some of the profit that you have, redirect that towards homespun projects, and see if you can't launch different products and projects. And so then you're no longer a peer agency. You're some kind of hybrid entrepreneur. You have products and services that you do yourself. And the best part of this is I think it makes for a very compelling reason why other clients should hire you, because we're in the trenches doing the work. What we advise you to do, we're doing ourselves. And if you see those results, we have proof every single day, because in our line of work, if we don't do the job, our other businesses go out of business.
It's very interesting that you say this, Chris, because we have, and I extensively work at LPS with a lot of live creators who essentially embed brands within their campaigns, and been doing this for some time. And I've always wondered, when agencies always get disrupted by these sort of upstart technology SaaS companies, look at a service and then try to find the standard patterns and then productize it. So what we're trying to do now is we have a network of close to 250 plus amazing, talented live creators. And all of them, we've noticed that they're different from influencers to the extent that they have the ability to get their audiences to act in a lot more impactful way. So we are trying to see if we can get them to become entrepreneurs and associate them with products. We're trying to build a marketplace where the live creator is our customer, and we're kind of giving them everything possible in terms of warehousing and logistics and operation, product development, to make them entrepreneurs. Essentially, we become a SaaS platform for them. We're still working on the product, but essentially that's a direction which I believe could be quite interesting to take, apart from just looking at an exit with a network agency.
I like that idea. I mean, I wonder if an agency of the future has all the infrastructure that you need, but isn't so heavy with staffing. And then the way that you wind up working at the agency is you have to go into kind of a pitch fest where you tell them your idea. And then if you guys like it, you get the job and we build it together and you own equity in that idea. And that's how they're able to see new ideas, new business models. And I think that could be really interesting to explore.
We're talking on the pitch fest, and this is something which is unique to creative shops. I've had some experience working with sort of the ERP and technology implementation side. And when I look at how they do their pre-sales, they actually price pre-sales. I mean, they actually price what they are pitching for. And the pitches are not as extensive and expansive as the way we do it in agencies. Perhaps it's the only industry where we do so much amount of unpaid work before we get started for absolute strangers who don't, right. There's not even a guarantee that we're going to get the project. So what's your perspective? Is that something that you see changing? And how does an agency not fall into the pitch trap? Or does it have to inevitably?
I don't think anything has to be. I mean, but there's a heavy consequence when you decide not to pitch. So right. As an agency, you're approached by a client that you love with the budget that you really love. And you're sitting there thinking, okay, what do I do? And so they have you test out ideas because they want to know what they're buying into. And I think as long as the risk and reward ratio is on the right side, then you're okay. So if you spend $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 to get an account, but the account is worth $200 million a year, it seems like a reasonable amount of investment to make. But you could also elect to say, our agency doesn't do this. We have a track record of winning and doing great work to help our clients grow. And here's some things you could read about. They'll just go to the next agency and say, will you do it? And of course they're going to agree because they're hungry and they want the work and they want the account. I don't know what to do about that agency. I was in that world. I couldn't change it. So I decided to get out of it.
So tell me about that. I mean, in terms of you getting out of the agency business and taking up a route which is fairly different, and how's that playing out?
There's only one more step in between the two. And I want to talk about that in case people don't know. So we work in the agency world and they're used to pitching. And then they asked all the vendors, production companies like ours to pitch too. But the risk reward ratio came so lopsided. We're risking a lot of money, time, and effort, and the payout is not that much because the budget that you give to us, a good portion, a majority of the portion goes to the production of the thing. So our margins are getting smaller and smaller. The expectations are getting higher and higher. Didn't make sense. So we switched the business model. What we did was we went client direct. So the only way we can survive is if we cut out the buyer of the creative service, the middle person, and then we work with clients directly. And this was a wonderful thing. It had its own challenges, but now there wasn't an agency sitting on top of us, marking up everything that we do and keeping the lion's share of the profit for themselves. But even still, you're still not the client. You're still working for someone, although maybe a better financial circumstance. It's still not great. So that's what led me to running an education company. Because here's the interesting thing. If you're able to create a market audience or community for ideas, eventually the idea could be support this by buying this service or this product or this intellectual property from us. And so we transitioned into that. And so I think that was one of the most liberating things I've ever done in my life. So we got rid of all things like deadlines, clients, change orders, pixel outfitters, whatever you want to call them, the art director who micromanages. We got rid of all of it because we're our own client. We make our own product. We market it ourselves. We distribute on our own channel, and we're hosting our own programs. And so we're kind of doing it like end to end. The only thing that's missing is a customer. And with them, we're able to sustain and build this company. And it doesn't have to be the biggest, but we're having the best time.
Absolutely. I think customers for you, Chris, are agencies like us. We've seen your work, we've seen what you sort of speak about, and we've kind of learned a lot from that. Coming back to what you spoke about AI, and I've seen one of these videos where you talk about how one of the people that you know had actually offered to make a virtual Chris, and you'd actually agreed to do that. Talk us through it. Would you do the same thing in today's times with so much amount of Gen AI happening? Where do you see that going in terms of people wanting to duplicate at least certain aspects of themselves?
Okay. There's a couple of things that we are going to have to agree to accept. Otherwise, my whole argument falls down. Right. AI is here. AI is incredibly powerful, and it's the dumbest it'll ever be. That means tomorrow will be better than it is today. And that AI does a lot of the intellectual heavy lifting for us, things that are repetitive, things that are complicated, that require a lot of human hours to do. AI can do better, faster than a human can do. When my former student who runs an AI company asked me, would I like a digital version of myself made? My first instinct was, why would I let you do that? My second instinct is, I think you're already doing it and other people will be doing it. So better for me to own my own digital avatar, my own AI version than someone else to do it. So in this case, first to market, best to market, it's all the same. I need to get it out there because I already know, and because people have told me, they transcribe our videos, and then they program a robot to think and act like me. And so it's already happening. So I'd rather have my own certified, authentic, official, verified version of what I think, what I believe. And so there are a lot of nuances in the way that I talk that the AI cannot replicate. But through consistent coaching and feedback, the AI starts talking and thinking a lot like me. Right. And I think the applications of it are wonderful. I can't be, and I don't want to be available 24/7. The robot can. Right. I don't have infinite patience. The robot does. I don't have infinite knowledge or recall ability. The robot does. So it may not be the exact version of me, but it might actually be a better version of me because I've heard it talk to people who have challenges, and it's way more patient at trying to talk to them and assess what their needs are than I would be because I just want to move on to the next thing. And I think about the applications of a teaching assistant. You're the professor. You're the source code. You have a TA, and the TA theoretically has taken your course and it's done really well. So they're going to help you and help other students have the same learning outcomes. I think this is a tremendous potential where if you can have a digital version of yourself who thinks and talks mostly like you, think about how that would impact how students would accomplish assignments or how well they would perform, what they're able to remember. And maybe a lot of their fear around not performing would go away because the AI can just go over drills after drill after drill and to test them and to make sure that they can communicate to the student in a way that they can understand best.
The corollary to that would be kind of customized education at scale, isn't
Yes.
it? Like
Yes.
if you're sort of not talking about everyone looking at the same video, we're talking about everyone having multiple routes. It's almost gamification in that sense, right? Like multiple routes to take within the same course or schedule. And that's quite fascinating in that sense.
I don't describe it as gamification. I almost think of it like our entire education system is designed for efficiency. Standardized tests allow the instructor to have a quick evaluation of each person.
Right.
But maybe a quick evaluation is not the best evaluation. So if we were to go back a couple hundred years before standardized school systems and testing existed, how did you learn? Well, we're going to teach you how to survive on the African plain. And we're going to teach you survival skills, but each person is going to do different things and need different help. And your true test is, did you survive? But there's 1,000 ways to survive, not just one correct way. So when you introduce an AI teaching assistant, that means there are many ways for you to get to the end goal, and we don't have to box you in to like one way of testing.
Correct.
And I think that opens up, like, just forget about the teaching assistant part. All the evaluation stuff can happen now. There's no standardized tests.
Correct. And if you have to look at it then the goal is not grades. The goal becomes a lot more bigger. It's fulfillment, it's development. And then there, as you rightly said, there are
Curiosity.
multiple curiosity, there are multiple routes to get there. I mean, someone would probably get to being fulfilled through creative learning, but someone may want to do that through like very rigid engineering. So that's interesting. If you have to sort of look at that.
I want to add to that. I mean, in America, I don't know how it is in other parts of the world, but if you were to poll most children who go to public school, I'm going to guess that a very small percentage of them actually enjoy going to school.
It's the same in every part of the world.
Okay, so we're all the same here. And why is that? Why is that? Because, when we're homeschooled, everything is tailored to us at our own pace. And homeschooling has its own challenges, but I've found that in the few instances where I meet people who are homeschooled, they're more articulate, they're more confident. They might not be as self-aware, but they're really smart and they know how to communicate very clearly because they haven't picked up all these habits. They don't have the nagging insecurity that most of us have. Like, is the teacher going to pick me? Am I going to be the last one on the chess team or whatever? They don't have all those fears and phobias. So they grow up mostly as a whole human, fully actualized. They have some social awkwardness. When I say some, a lot. They don't have so much self-awareness, but those things can be remedied. And I think there's something beautiful about that. Now, can we do that at scale? Can everyone go to school and feel as if they were homeschooled, as not to add an additional burden for the parents who are super busy trying to do what they need to do anyways? I think then it's a game changer. Imagine how many healthier people we would have in the world. People who wouldn't be so, the first option is to resort to violence or to think of themselves only, to act in selfish ways, so that we don't have so many people who feel like society left them behind, that they weren't given an equal shot. I think there's something wonderful in there that is worth fighting for, to work towards innovating and thinking about it outside the box.
Also to sort of look at it from a point of leveling the whole cultural differences which exist. When you're looking at such amount of customized learnings, the place that you're actually located doesn't even matter when it comes to education then.
Right.
And I think those are the things which are beautiful. And sort of coming back to also your travel, Chris, and you've traveled extensively to different parts of the world, and your talks essentially sort of center on more about sort of talking about the business of creative problem solvers. How can they sort of get more out of what they're doing? What kind of a diversity of these sort of different creative shops or people that you've seen in different parts of the world? I'd love to hear some instances where you got to see something which you didn't sort of know or you weren't exposed to in Los Angeles, in different parts of the world, in terms of how people are creative problem solvers.
Okay, this is a broad blanket statement, okay?
Sure.
But in America, we're a bunch of rebels and misfits. We're anti-conformists. We want to do things our own way, hence our break from our colonial masters, right? And so there's a whole culture here. It's a big melting pot. We celebrate individualism and success and entrepreneurship, and we don't shy away from that at all. And I think that's pretty normal. And it's maybe even crazier because I live in Los Angeles, and a certain part of Los Angeles where the most ambitious, driven, talented people in the world come here to make it on the biggest stage in the world. And I think that's very exciting, but that becomes the cultural norm. When we leave America, or we come into the rural parts of the country, it starts to feel a little bit more like the rest of the world. Exceptionalism is an idea that's frowned upon. In Australia, they call it tall poppy syndrome. You're getting too big. In Ireland, they call it getting too big for your boots. There's a lot of expressions throughout the world because the rest of the world practices this idea of humility. Like, it's good to be humble, to think less of oneself, to have a poor estimation of one's own abilities. And so when I go out there and I say something that I think sounds pretty normal, they hear it as quite bombastic and kind of full of oneself. And I say, well, is there a reason why Western culture seems to dominate the rest of the world, that they are exporting more IP and brands that people covet. There are very few products and ideas, even people who have influence in the West, but the West seems to do a really good job of spreading this throughout the world, from music to movies. There's an exception here. Korea has done a really great job of having soft power, K-pop, K-dramas, all those kinds of things. They've done a really good job. So I would love to see more of the East and the Middle East be able to embrace some of these ideas and to use them and to let go of this idea of repressing our own talent and our creativity. But in order to do that, we have to have cultures that encourages exceptionalism, achievement. And we have to have cultures that allow for us to freely express ourselves in any which way. Until that happens, I think then culturally we're limiting what we can do.
And I completely agree with you. It's easier for exceptional talent to get that attention when it comes to the global stage and the culture which actually promotes it. And there is a correlation in people actually having those outliers on the positive side of things. But at the same time, is there a direct correlation? Because a lot of times it also depends on what side of the economic graph is the country on. So if you look at, let's say, for a large amount of time, you would probably see a lot of exceptional talent would probably come from United Kingdom. When there was a time when it was sort of the colonial bastion of the world, right? Like at that point in time, and then you have then sort of US became this foremost economic powerhouse, and then you see culture getting formed there, and so there is also a strong correlation about where does the country lie from an economic graph point of view. And I agree with you, Korea is an outlier there, but to a large extent it's also because it's sort of, you're right on the fact that these are the countries where things have come from, but exceptionalism is also probably perhaps just one of the determinants of why this has happened, apart from the sort of the economic side of things and how sort of things develop, if I have to say that. But have you been to a country which is very different, let's say, where you've seen a creative energy which is very different from the US? I'd love to hear any experiences that you've seen and spoken to people who've come from very different backgrounds, but have the same problems.
Well, I mean, I see it in a lot of different ways. And I know that Americans, and rightfully so, are criticized for being loud and brash and kind of self-centered and arrogant. And I'm not a champion for that either. Right. But I also think there's a dangerous other side to it when you suppress and repress exceptionalism. I remember reading an article and asked Bono from U2 why he still lives in Ireland. He goes, sometimes if I think I'm too big for myself, my community will knock me down. It's like, why would they do that? At one point, U2 is the world's largest rock band. Correct. They're superstars. They've done things that no one else has been able to do. 100%. So why is it that you need to be knocked down? I don't understand that. And I'm not saying, and I want to be very clear about this, because you're the world's biggest rock band doesn't mean you're better than other people, that other people are less deserving of you. That's not what I'm a champion for. But why are we now, almost like forgetting that we've accomplished things, and why aren't we supporting that? So I think there's this internal energy that I see in a lot of cultures where people create an artificial ceiling for what they can accomplish. And so then therefore they don't dream so big. A friend of mine asked me yesterday, she asked me, Chris, have you thought about just launching a single product, and instead of trying to build an education company, wouldn't you be more successful? And I'm like, absolutely. I'll make more money if I just became a lifestyle business and built one product and solved one problem for one avatar on one channel with one promotion. But I'm not trying to be like a lifestyle product. I'm trying to rock and change the way we learn the education system at its core. And I think maybe this doesn't pay out for like 10, 15, 20, 35 years. I don't know, but I'm willing to play the game. I said to her, I would rather fail pursuing the impossible than to succeed pursuing the possible. I don't want that, or the probable. That bores the heck out of me because there's so many examples of people just settling for that. And I think if that's part of the culture, whether you're in Manila or if you're in Cairo, which I've been, there's this idea that we can't do that here. And that really kills me because they've already put a container on their potential. And the human potential is crazy. We're the only species on Earth that can dream of something that hasn't happened, to visualize it, and then to manifest it into happening. I don't know how long it's going to take, but we will be on Mars. We'll be like an interplanetary species at some point. And the fact that there was a period in time when we didn't even know if anything existed beyond the sky, that we can see it, we can dream it, we can visualize it, we can manifest it, and we can build a plan to achieve it. So what's happening is in a lot of markets and countries is maybe through parenting, through culture, society, we're being pushed down. And maybe we should be 6'7", but right now we're 5'4".
It's quite fascinating because as an agency owner, to make the transition into kind of an education business that you did, talk us through how that transition happened, and what are those sort of steps, actionable things that you did. Did you retain the same team? What did you decide not to do? It's quite a journey which is very counterintuitive to take.
How did it happen? Slowly and painfully at a lot of costs. Okay. That's the headline. Now we'll go to the subhead and the details.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So I'm running 2 companies at the same time, and you only have finite time. Everybody has that. So something
Absolutely.
has to give. So basically, I've been able to build my service design agency blind up until a certain point where the sales, marketing, and fulfillment of work can be done without me.
Right.
It can be done without me. It's a standalone operation. Could it do better with me? Probably, but it's doing okay. It just needs to do okay for long enough so that I have runway to build the next thing. So almost all of my energy for a period of about 2 years is focused on testing, experimenting, building a new business that I didn't even know at that time could be a business. So I don't have the exact numbers here in front of me, but I think the first year we made $34,000. The next year, like maybe 80 or 90,000, not enough to even pay a high level executive or person on my team. And it took 2 years just to get there. But the indicators point north and it's moving in the right direction. The trend lines are good. And I'm learning a lot about myself, and I'm finding something which is way more valuable than developing a second company. I'm finding my ikigai, my reason for being.
Nice. And both of these businesses sort of running on their own. The one, the agency is already sort of self-sustained. Things are moving there, self-sustaining. And then this is the business that's your passion, and that's the core of what you get up every day from your bed and sort of look forward to.
Yes. And I want to say this. It was just a money pit, right? It's a time pit. It's a money 100%. Pit. It's not sustainable. And I could admit this now, but basically the service company was secretly paying for the ability for me to try a new idea. Luckily, I own both companies, so it's not a problem. It's not like funny bookkeeping, but basically we have an office space, we have equipment that we can use, and we have people and leverage, and we can do all these things. So the equipment that we're using to produce commercials and music videos, we could use to produce videos for YouTube. So we need that. And I need to point that out because some people are like, I can't do it. I know, because the resources weren't there for you to do it. So what we do is, if we're going to go on any great adventure, we have to have enough resources to make or survive the journey. We have to make sure we have enough rations, that a horse or mule or camel is available for us. And we have the tools, the knives, and we have enough stuff to sustain us on a long journey. A lot of people start out and they're walking barefoot with 2 days worth of food and water. They have no purification techniques. They don't know how to survive. And of course, they're going to die. So there's this moment where you see the profit line or the revenue line from the service company going like this. And then you see the profit line from the education company going like that. And when they cross over, I'm like, it's time to stop.
Right.
So at that point, I invite everyone from the old company, and I say, and I've used this metaphor, I'm the captain. Right. We built a big, beautiful ship. You're all amazing people, but I built a new ship that's going to a new land with unknown adventures, but the food source is plentiful. I invite each and every one of you to get off the old ship and to find your way onto the new ship, or you can stay on the ship, but that ship is going to crash at some point in the near future. So what happened was, there was 3 types of people. People who quit right away, people who quit a little bit later, and people who joined me. Sorry, there's a 4th group, and people I had to fire.
What would be the majority of the people in terms of which bucket?
The majority of the people went with me.
Nice.
Some people quit right away. Some people quit a little bit later because they felt safe. They felt like they were giving up too much of what they built equity in themselves to start this new thing. They didn't understand the business model. They couldn't see the future that I saw. It's almost like, could you imagine? I'm not saying I'm that great, but like Steve Jobs, like, we have this thing. It's called the iPhone. I think it's going to work. Let's ditch all of what we know about Apple and let's go all in on the iPhone. And if we can do that, we can be successful. We're going to sell 100 million iPhones. I think when he said that, my jaw dropped. I'm like, there's no way you're going to sell 100 million iPhones. They're on some gazillion billion iPhones at this point. They far exceeded that goal, but it's kind of that moment. The future's never clear for us. So it requires an act of faith and some courage, and then you can do it.
And there was never a point of time when you thought about formally, proactively exiting the business before getting onto the education business?
I I tried.
Right.
Actually, I did. I did have an offer. It was for $1 million to sell my old business, and at that point, the business was the name, a book of business, a portfolio. But really, what they needed to happen was to bring some of the team over, and the team didn't want to go over, and that was the biggest problem. They didn't want to go over, so I can't force them to go over, and there's nothing for them to buy. I wish they did because I'd be $1 million richer.
Correct. I always do this with people I speak to. What's the most unpopular opinion, Chris, that you think exists when it comes to the business of creative output or agencies?
I think if you can do something brilliant, if you really believe in your ability to grow something from nothing, to infuse it with magic, art, and creativity, that you're this gifted misfit. This is a term that Brian Collins shared with me. Why won't you apply some of that to yourself? Why is it that we're always giving others the best of what we have? We very rarely apply it to ourselves.
Yeah. It's kind of saying that the future of an agency is trying to be not an agency in that
Yes.
sense, right?
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. It's been a pleasure, Chris, and I hope it's been the same for you. I'd like to believe this is a start of conversation and we get an opportunity again to do this in person when you're in Dubai. I'd love to host you here.
Thank
for
you. I
tuning
have
in.
a good time. I appreciate the line of
Amazing,
questioning and
amazing.
the dialogue with you. Appreciate it.
Great. Pleasure, Chris. Thank you.